So we have a very diverse panel and very diverse experiences amongst us. I know, Madame Aspaker, you will have possibly to leave a little earlier, so maybe I can ask you to start first, and Mr. Kobanescu also. But let me start by asking you, Norway is a very important producer of hydrocarbons, but it's also possibly got one of the cleanest electricity mixes in the world. As you're looking forward from your position in both situations, the leg in both camps, how do you see this progressing in the future, and where do you think are the real points of international cooperation that can help to drive a positive future?
Thank you. First of all, I think I'd like to underline that political will and close cooperation based on mutual trust, stable and ambitious policy frameworks have made the Nordic power market the most integrated in the world. I think interconnectors between the Nordic countries, that helps us have the renewable, the amount of renewable energy as high as possible. That's part of and an important political way forward. And from the Norwegian point of view, we'll also close connected to the European Union and the development of the energy union. That means that we are also now constructing more interconnectors. That means that we could, by the contribution from Norwegian hydropower, could balance the sun and the solar and the wind power with Norwegian hydropower. But as you pointed out, we are also an oil and gas producer, and I believe, although renewables are very important and is the final solution, I think we have decades ahead where we still have to have kind of fossil fuels also within the energy production. And my point of view will then be that if natural gas, LNG or others, if that could make us less dependent on coal, for example, that will be a main contribution to have a greener society. So more international cooperation, more integrated markets, more interconnectors. I think that's very important. And the Nordic example could be an example used also for other regions in the world, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those important comments. And in fact, I can reveal to you that the Nordic Power Pool was the motivation behind the idea to develop the African clean energy corridors, the Central American clean energy corridor, the work that is happening in ASEAN to interconnect markets, and in Southeastern Europe in the Balkan regions. So it is precisely this, the interconnectors, a regulated regional market for electricity, allowing large shares of renewables. But you also mentioned that there is still a future with oil and gas, and we need to think carefully about how we do that. And I think that was mentioned earlier that there are, in fact, other higher value uses in the future for hydrocarbons. And I can tell you, being based in Abu Dhabi has been a very important education for me. And not many people would have expected that for an international organization for renewables to be based in the heart of the oil-producing region of the Gulf, that you would actually be in a place where the exhibition of vision and commitment for change was remarkable, coming from countries that are vested and have grown as a result of their natural endowment. And we're very honored to have His Excellency Ali Naimi with us, and I've been looking at the plans in Saudi Arabia and the vision for the future diversification of the economy and energy. And Your Excellency, people are used to reading your lips and trying to understand what you're saying in the oil markets, but I think Saudi Arabia is becoming important in the global diversified energy market. How do you see it from Saudi Arabia?
Well, thank you, Adnan. First of all, I am very happy to be back in Berlin. I come here for two reasons. One, climate change. The second one is renewables. I wish I can come and enjoy a holiday in Berlin. That doesn't happen. There are three subjects I want to address briefly. Fossil fuels. By the way, they're not that bad. I want also to touch on renewables and what we are doing there. And finally, touch on what we are doing in the area of technology, research, and development. These are the three areas that I will focus on. If you were in Saudi Arabia in the 1960s, you would have seen a sky lit at night from all the flares we were burning then. And what did we do with the flares? We collected them, the gas that is, and we made a major petrochemical industry that produced a lot of materials. Now, of course, we talk about CO2 emissions. Dr. Birol talked about emissions. This is the culprit that we should work on and we should control, rather than talking about keeping oil and gas in the ground. We can't afford that. There is no way in the next 50 years that we will be able to do that. So what should we be doing? We should focus on eliminating emission and creating materials out of emissions, like what we are doing. So what are we doing with emissions? We are collecting CO2 from most of our facilities. We are injecting them in the ground, and we are watching what is happening to them in the ground. Two, we are creating petrochemicals from them, changing them into useful polymers. And three, we are working on efficiency of engines. How can we eliminate emissions from cars and converting them into something useful? And finally, we looked at rubber, tires. We should be able to make rubber that reduces frictions from driving. So those are the areas we need to focus on controlling emissions. Now, renewables, I don't think there is an ideal country for renewables than Saudi Arabia. We have the sunshine, we have the acreage, and we have the silica that you need to make renewables. And these three are what we need. I hope I can interest investors worldwide, especially in Germany, to come to Saudi Arabia, join hand with our business community, and develop an industry integrated from the sand, the pure sand, to the panel, and then generate power accordingly. That's number two. Number three, we are focused on research in a number of areas, not only in Saudi Arabia, but worldwide. And the purpose of the research, again, is to how do we transition from oil and gas to renewables eventually. And I hope, again, we will have participation worldwide in this effort. I think we have over 10 or 11 research centers worldwide, in the US, in Europe, and in Asia, for the purpose of moving, first of all, eliminating emissions, making materials out of emissions, and then improving the environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you for that really, I think the room agrees with me, a very, very positive assessment of the future. And I think it's important that we begin to understand it's not a question of good and bad, it's a question of what are the right decisions that are going to take us to a positive outcome in the future. And I can attest to the fact that we worked with Saudi Arabia on the solar and wind mapping. I was in Riyadh for the launching of those assessments a year before last. And I can tell you some of the best wind and solar maps I have seen anywhere in terms of investment grade quality were the ones in Saudi Arabia. And we are very hopeful that we will soon see, as you said, Your Excellency, a ramp up of investment and a movement in that direction. So thank you very much for that. Minister Comanescu, Romania is also very well endowed with renewable energy resources. You are now looking at developing this in a positive way. How do you see the perspective for Romania, and what are your priorities in terms of international cooperation and learning processes to support this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me thank our German friends, and particularly Vice Chancellor Sigmar Gabriel and my friend Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier for inviting me here to this extremely important conference, and to give me the opportunity to say a few words about how we in Romania view the steps to be taken, the measures to be taken so as to progress in the transition to a low-carbon, secure, and competitive economy. I find this conference not only very much welcome, but also very timely. We are, as was said here today, 1 year after the launching of the Energy Union strategy of the European Union. It's 1 year since then. We are a few months after the extremely important decisions in Paris. And we are some months ahead of the next COP. And I'm pretty sure that, convinced that the gathering of today would have an extremely important contribution to the preparation of the next conference. With this, I would, and fully subscribing to what Frank-Walter Steinmeier was saying this morning, that transition towards a new energy framework, if I may say so, it's not just something which should be ecological, but it is extremely logical. And it's a must, I would say. So it's in this context that I would elaborate a little bit, hopefully very briefly, because at a certain moment I would need to get to another commitment. I would allow myself to make a few remarks on 3 aspects which, in my opinion, have a lot to do with generating that framework or environment for a fruitful cooperation in this area. My first remark is that, and refers to the relation between policy for development of energy efficiency or renewable sources and policy for ensuring security of supply. I would insist that security of supply, especially in the current circumstances, is extremely important. Both these dimensions are important, are key pillars of what I have already mentioned, the Energy Union. But from a regional perspective, for example, in Central and Eastern Europe, it is hardly possible to avoid the context of the energy supply while considering any of the other 4 pillars of this Energy Union. to overcome energy supply vulnerabilities and risks, and to ensure energy market integration and fluidity remains a priority. Again, especially in the current circumstances. And in achieving this objective, we in Romania are trying to rely on a balanced energy mix, neutral technologies, and on the use of indigenous resources. I have to say, you mentioned already that we Romanians, well, Romania finds itself in a way in a rather, let's say, better position than other countries in the region, given the fact that we avail of some important energy sources. Also, prospects are there to develop the capabilities in this area. I'm referring, for example, to gas. But that doesn't mean that we are not concerned and we are not determined to work so as to give the appropriate place to the renewable energy. Our intention is to give renewable nuclear and clean coal technologies a more significant role in our national energy mix. My second remark is about investment costs in all areas of the energy sector. Most challenging in the transformation of the energy sector is related to costs in terms of financing and affordability. That's another aspect which we think it's of particular importance. My third remark brings me to the importance and the role of the regional, European, and international cooperation advancing the energy efficiency strategies. First, in my opinion, comes the important role of a coherent and predictable energy governance at national level. It's a prerequisite for being able to get into an efficient and productive international cooperation. And that means that requires, of course, in each of the countries, a coherent implementation of legislation, infrastructure development, transparency in setting new intergovernmental agreements in the energy sector, and better cooperation at the level of national regulator authorities. At the international level, we need to give larger credit to the pillars of the energy union to be used in promoting cooperation with other partners. And notably, it's important in terms of developing advanced technologies and joint projects on energy efficiency, an increased use of renewable energy, and enhanced cooperation on research and innovation within EU and in relations with other partners. And I'm referring including to the United States and Canada. These are the, let's say, my introductory remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Comanescu. I think you've added a couple of very important dimensions to the discussion: the security of supply, addressing supply vulnerability, seeing how renewables can actually be a solution to supply issues, but based on affordability and cost. And I think that's really part of the framework we have on the basis of which many countries are talking to each other. And I think the interesting thing about being in Germany is that they have actually taken on board many of the early issues in this field and have begun to show examples of how this can be addressed. Let's go back to Asia. And we have representative of Dr. Huang, Minister of Industry and Trade, who can join us. Vietnam is growing extremely fast. I worked in Vietnam in the early 90s, setting up some institutions, but it's not recognizable anymore how quickly Vietnam has emerged as a strong economy in the Asian region, and an energy-hungry economy. How are you going to deal with these challenges, and what's the role of renewables in that?
Thank you, Anand. You are right that Vietnam as an emerging country that achieved remarkable success in economic development in the last 20 years. So for economy, during the last 10 years, we achieved about around 6% per GDP growth per annum. So did the energy consumption. So by the end of 2015, the energy consumption of countries was around 55 million ton of oil equivalent, and the growth of energy consumption in our countries was about 5 to 6% per annum. That was huge, and we forecast the economic growth in the next 10 years also around 6 to 7% per annum. So that put a lot of pressure on the energy security to maintain such a fast growth economy. And we also forecast that energy consumption of the nation would be around 6 to 7% per annum. And so how can we meet such fast growth energy consumption in country in the context that Vietnam has very limited natural resources in terms of fossil fuel resources like coal or gas. So I think we need to rely on still rely on the fossil fuel in the future, but to less extent as we expected in the last few years. And we put more emphasis and effort to develop more renewable energies, especially new kind of energy which we have not exploited yet in the past. That is wind and solar energy. But you may know that the government of Vietnam have been fully aware of how clean energy we had to use. So in the last 10 years, potential in hydro energy has been nearly exploited. So now we need more kind of new renewable energy like wind and solar. And according to our Power Master Plan number 7, the contribution of renewable energy for meeting power demand in our country by 2030 would be 35 to 40% of electricity demand, and among which solar and wind energy would count for 7%, and the rest come from hydro. So actually, the government of Vietnam also shows very strong commitment to the kind of low carbon economy and also more usage of clean energy and renewable energy like wind, solar, and hydro. The other important strategy that enable our country to meet the energy demand in the future is we also focus on energy savings and energy efficiency. According to our statistics, the energy intensity of Vietnam is still quite high in comparison with other countries in the region. So that's one of our strategies to promote more and more energy savings and energy efficiency through some kind of mandatory mechanism, like if enterprise want to produce or manufacture or import kind of electric appliance, they must use more efficient and electricity appliance or products. And also, I mean that for energy efficiency, we have some limitation on the technology that imported to our country, that the efficiency of those imported technologies should exceed some minimum level of efficiency. Otherwise, it should not be imported or manufactured, or must not be used. So by some energy savings and energy efficiency, also develop new kind of renewable energy like solar or wind energy. We hopefully that could meet our energy demand in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think beyond hopefully, surely, I think you've reached the end of the hydro potential. I think there's a lot of good wind and solar potential in Vietnam. But you mentioned something, and you underscored what Minister Naimi had said. The emergence of the efficiency agenda, the standards for vehicles and appliances have to improve, and that has to be a central part of the discussion on energy in the future, going beyond renewables. So I'm being told that we are short on time, but I want to move to Minister Kassoulidis from Cyprus. We've worked a lot with small island developing states. We have a large island developed state in Cyprus, but you were kind enough to host a number of consultations on islands and the renewable energy future for islands, and we have together developed a roadmap for Cyprus. So, Excellency, for Cyprus, what are the specific challenges in the context of this, and how are we going forward?
Well, thank you. Allow me to concentrate on the necessity for international cooperation if energy sufficient efficiency is going to succeed. And I think the example of Cyprus will demonstrate this. First of all, on energy efficiency, on renewables, Cyprus hasn't got the technology which, of course, will take advantage of from others. But Cyprus has the sun, 250 days per year. We are beating the targets on renewables, and we are very optimistic that in the next targets we were given by the European Union, we will surpass them. But the need for addressing all the energy issues makes it obligatory to look to additional areas of international cooperation. We have the European Union, naturally, the energy market, the common energy market of the European Union, but Cyprus, geographically an island, is an energy island, unfortunately, is distal to the rest of Europe except from Greece, which is the closest. So Cyprus has developed, through its foreign policy, a network of cooperation with its neighbors in the Eastern Mediterranean. Greece, Cyprus, and Egypt. Greece, Cyprus, and Israel. Now Greek, Cyprus, and Jordan. Then Lebanon follows, then Palestine follows. And I hope that when the problem of Cyprus is resolved, and hopefully not in the long distance anymore, since the negotiations are advancing, why not Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus? So, first of all, is the cooperation between these countries regarding natural gas that has been discovered in Egypt, in Israel, in Cyprus, and in the future, hopefully, in Lebanon. The East Mediterranean natural gas reservoirs may become tomorrow another alternative route of supply to Europe or to the region, and it will contribute significantly to the energy security of supply in these regions. The more you get, the more is better. Regarding electricity, is the question of connectivity. The question of connectivity is about to be resolved by the European Union adopting the Euro-Asia Interconnector, as it is called, that is going to unite Israel with Cyprus and Greece and then to Europe of providing electricity, and therefore Cyprus cannot only rely on its own electricity grid. And then it's the project of common interest about a pipeline that leaves the Eastern Mediterranean and goes to Crete, and from Crete to Europe again, which is another route for supply of natural gas. And if the problem of Cyprus is resolved, nobody excludes the pipeline that goes to Turkey for domestic needs, but also for supply in Europe. So in general, as I understand, you have said, Mr. President, that the time is short. I'm a foreign minister, I'm not an energy minister. But let me tell you that as Cyprus, we have a vision in our foreign policy. The vision of our foreign policy is to use the natural gas and the other energy sources, including the sun, as the founding fathers of the European Union has used coal and steel. The precursor of cooperation, peace and stability in the Eastern Mediterranean between enemies of yesterday and future partners of today. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said, Your Excellency. And how energy cooperation can drive international cooperation in a broader sense, as we also heard from Norway. We have two speakers left. Let me first take Tembisile Majola from South Africa. We know in sub-Saharan Africa how South Africa has become a linchpin for the renewable development and strategy. And then we will move to Minister Vasil Hudak as our last speaker from the Slovak Republic, if you don't mind, sir. So, Madam, please.
Thank you, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to be here. I believe that our presence is also because of the very good cooperation we have with the government of Germany, particularly in the issue of renewable energy. But I also want to align myself with the former panel that was speaking about the fact that energy transmission means many different things for all of us. It's a mixture of different things. For us, part of the issue of energy transition is about moving, obviously, to a cleaner forms of energy. But at the same time, we are addressing the issue of lack of energy for a lot of our people. So we still have those challenges to look at. We're looking at off-grid solutions because of sometimes just the topography of the areas. But while we have all these different issues, we also have a commitment as government to energy security, reliable and affordable energy. And I think all of us will agree that when we started off in South Africa, there was a lot of skepticism around the renewable energy sector and what it could achieve. And through the processes we put in place, which was very competitive, it has come down tremendously. I think the German government is looking at emulating that because they have not even reached that level, even though they were the pioneers in this area. But also important for us is that we have looked at the fact that the energy mix for us is important. We cannot have an either-or situation. A lot of the countries in the region, we are very water-scarce countries, so hydro is not a big part. But we've got a lot of countries with a lot of water resources, so we're looking at developing more of those that hydro potential to add to our energy mix. But we also have a question of global changes and global climatic changes. We're currently undergoing a very severe drought in Southern Africa. So a lot of the countries that rely heavily on hydro are now requesting energy from ourselves because of the climatic conditions. So the question of energy mix is not about a nice to have. It's actually very important for energy security and energy reliability. We also a country that obviously, I think the only one on the continent that has some nuclear capability. And we're looking at expanding that because currently it's the cheapest form of energy. much cheaper than even our coal resources. So we're looking at that as well. And of course, energy is also, I mean, nuclear energy is also the most productive because we also use it for medical purposes. We export medical isotopes that treat cancer to over 60 countries on a daily basis. So it's one of those energy sources as well that's very productive. But the growth of the wind and solar in South Africa has been phenomenal. And the costs have come down dramatically. We've made mistakes because it was an experiment, and we're correcting some of those in terms of, yes, you can give the market a certain leeway, but don't give it too much leeway, because then you find yourself chasing them instead of them chasing you. And that's in terms of directing the energy to where it is required the most. But as I say, it's been a very good experiment. We've learned a lot of things. The issue of energy accessibility and affordability for us remains very, very important. We are also a country with a huge coal reserves. So carbon production through of energy using our coal resources will continue, but what we are also looking at is applying a lot of the very clean technologies that are being developed, including burning, or not burning, but using the coal while it's still underground so that you do not have the emissions. So the technology is, the research and development is working very hard, and we have some of our experts in that area looking at how we can exploit these natural resources in a much cleaner way. Because the renewables have been good for us, but in our particular context, unfortunately, they are very capital intensive as well as startup, and a lot of our own indigenous business people have not been able to participate without effective subsidies. So we need to find ways in which they can participate and we can have meaningful transformation in that sector. In terms of energy efficiency, maybe at the global level, our targets have not been so wonderful, but domestically, we've had very good results in terms of those who use cleaner and better and safer technologies have actually been incentivized. So those kind of technologies have worked very well for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Majola. In terms of thank you, Madam. Thank you for taking part. We know you have to leave. You've done, there's a very interesting aspect to international cooperation we're seeing. When we talked about the record PV price in Dubai, then we had a record CSP price in South Africa. There was a common denominator. The winning company was a Saudi Arabian utility, Aqua Power. So we are seeing patterns of international cooperation and investment changing dramatically with the change in the mix of energy. Last but not least, and I apologize for keeping you waiting, Minister Hudak, Minister of Economic Affairs of Slovakia. You know, many Europeans have been mentioning the European energy market, the energy union, but countries have different endowments and different approaches. From Slovakia's point of view, you have renewable resource framework, but you also have alternatives. So how are you approaching the whole issue of sustainable energy and decarbonization?
Thank you, and I understand I'm in a very difficult position because I'm basically between you and the lunch, so I'll be very brief. I don't want you to starve and then be out of energy, whatever the source is. Yes, certainly, Slovakia is a member of the European Union. We will actually have a very special position because since July this year, for half a year, we will be kind of in charge of Europe. We will have our presidency of the European Union. And energy issues are certainly at the top of the agenda of the European Union. One of the core issues we will be facing, and which will be one of the priorities, is how do we move forward with the development of the energy union in Europe. This is very, very important agenda, which certainly includes also a heavy focus on renewables. But it also means that we have to look at Europe as a market of 500 million consumers, And this is the main added value of the European Union on the economic side. How do we break the national barriers? How do we move from 28 national energy markets to one unified energy market? And that's a big task. And then, of course, we have issues of energy security, supplies, and all those issues which are part of this. Slovakia is the country, we are very committed to process of decarbonization. We are moving towards our goal of reaching 14% of energy production from renewables by 2020. But I would say something that maybe is not so much among these friends of renewables, but what I heard from our colleagues from South Africa, from SaudiArabia, from Norway, is that I think we need to look at what we want to achieve, how we want to achieve it, and for how much. What we do want to achieve it globally is a world which will be good for people to live, with less emissions, with better climate and better environment. How we achieve it, I think, has to be done in a holistic way. And holistic way, I mean, certainly renewables is an important element of this. But for example, in Slovakia, we are very, very focused on nuclear power. I think, as was mentioned in Saudi Arabia, yes, you have very strong carbon sources which you can use in a way which would not create so much pollution as used to be in the past. So if we find a way how to create a mix on the national level, on the international level, an energy mix which would fulfill the key elements, the key criteria and the goals we want to achieve, I think then we should move in such direction. And that's basically our approach as well, which we want to also promote on the European level, that we need to be holistic in terms of how we achieve the goals which we do. We support Energiewende. I think it's a great idea, and the German government has been very consistent in doing this. At the same time, we talk to EONs, to RWEs, and so on, and frankly, it's a very difficult process. These traditional companies are facing suddenly a situation where they are losing core parts of their economy and business models. So it requires new thinking, new ways how the businesses are done, and it requires also on the European level a new approach as well. Last thing I want to mention is that, and this is another issue we want to promote on the European, certainly national level, is how do we bring more innovation, more research and development to the energy level? How do we promote smart energy concept? And here we are, for example, in Slovakia, working on projects with, for example, with Silicon Valley companies on the so-called storage batteries for renewables, because one issue is, okay, it's nice to have wind, solar, but they function when there is a wind and solar. How do we store this electricity created and use it at the time when it's needed is another issue. But also such innovations as nano solar power plants and so on. These are all new ideas. So I think that international cooperation is something that we need, and I would like to again thank the organizers of this conference for putting such an excellent event discussion together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And we look forward to your holistic approach when you're cheering Europe in the second half of the year. Thank you for that. But let me thank the panel. We will have very quickly an update on how we are trending on Twitter in a moment. But I just want to give an opportunity to ministers if they want to come back very quickly. And I know Mr. Komanescu had a quick point.
Yeah. Very briefly, a lot of important aspects have been touched upon during our debate. Security of supply, diversification, and so on. I will not dwell on that. But there is one aspect which it seems to me is extremely important to point at, which is related especially, but not only, to this transition period, and also to the energy efficiency. It's about interconnectivity among member states, amongst countries. And what I want to say is not just about the interconnectivity at the level of the members of the European Union, but we have to reach to help developing interconnectivity also with partner countries, especially those who are members of the Energy Charter Treaty. That's an extremely important point. Well, this is one of the reasons, but not only one, the only one, for which we are so much determined to help in developing interconnectivity through Romania, with Romania, between the European Union and the Republic of Moldova, for example. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that's an indicator of how important integrating markets, building infrastructure, looking at grids, and looking at regulated electricity markets at a regional level can also lower costs, but also drive international cooperation and understanding. And Minister, you mentioned that too. So, unless there's a very urgent issue, Madam, please.
Thank you. I think I would not be forgiven in South Africa if I didn't raise this issue. Just to say, for us, what's also very important is that energy poverty impacts much more on women than on men. So we'd really appreciate having many more women because they actually have to deal with these issues. Not just the environmental degradation, but the impact it has on them, whether it's space heating, whether it's cooking, whether it's access to clean water, and so on and so forth. So I think that's just one plea I would want to be able to put here and hope that all of us can take it. Thank you.
I'm very pleased you mentioned that, and I know in my country, in Kenya, we talk about the hundreds of thousands who are impacted by indoor air pollution, but if we look at the gender distribution of that impact, it's disproportionately women, and women are the ones who are facing the hardship out of the energy poverty situation. So thank you for raising that. We have a very tough German MC who keeps looking at me. I'm trying to avoid her eye. I know that they are very sticklers on punctuality, but we have an opportunity to see how we've been doing on Twitter. So Mr. Twitter, please.
Yes, thank you. Despite the German punctuality, so I think that last point was very interesting, and that's probably very much been liked by our Twitter audience, because there is a sense that there needs to be a women's voice in this as well. There's also a hot discussion going on about whether fossil fuels and nuclear fuels can actually be part of a renewable solution. So that's very hotly debated. And markets have been a big issue. Also on earlier panels, with the question coming up, has there ever actually been a fair free market, and what are subsidies doing to a free market? And even before this panel, the interest in how collaboration can help in creating a transition was brought up. Norway, I think, has given an interesting example. One point that's been raised is how can developing countries or the least developed countries actually get to the point of where they renew their energy system, and how can maybe governments help in that? So that's what
well, thank you very much, and let me finally thank the panel. Thank you for sharing your time and perspective. I think it's been a very interesting start to a very interesting conference, and we look forward to the rest of the conference, but I thank you all for your participation. Thank you.